I even saw Bayern fans saying that he's not a legend at the club. And I think, again, you're too sensible to kind of buy into that. I mean, he did score.
Yeah, that's not even close to reality.
Right. He scored 344 goals for the club, second only to the late, great Gerd Muller, and a ways ahead of former teammate, now Thomas Muller, who sits in third. So, yeah, obviously, this is not really a question. Sounds like a legend to me. But I think the real argument is going to be, depending on what he does in 2 years or 3 years at Barcelona, if he's ever going to be, quote unquote, legend status there, in the same way that I think ideally where he's going to fit in the pantheon of Barcelona players is going to be a lot like a Thierry Henry, where you go, well, that guy, of course, that dude is a legend of the game forever and ever and ever. Mm-hmm. But he certainly was always going to have been better someplace else. And I think where he's oddly going to fit in the Barcelona thing. Again, if he delivers and is actually playing on the field, which we'll talk about later. But
exactly. I feel like his maximum could be Samuel Eto'o, in that he was a great striker that was great in multiple places and just happened to have one of those places be Barcelona. In terms of the fans and the fans' reaction, I think it's less that I feel like it's less that they legitimately want Lewandowski to leave. I think it's just a lot of people are really confused and concerned why he would want to leave the club in the first place, because, you know, we can all talk about, like, we can call the Bundesliga the Farmers League as much as much as we want. It's not. I think most people will say that it is, but it's not. It's a very competitive league down from below Bayern Munich's standpoint. But to talk specifically about Bayern Munich, right? Lewandowski has gone from 2012 to this year, which includes the 2 years that he was at Dortmund, with winning a trophy every single year. He now moves to a club that has a tradition of winning trophies, but doesn't really seem that poised to do so. They'll be poised to challenge, at least in the Copa del Rey and, of course, in La Liga, but to win, that's an entirely different thing in terms of the course of the season, especially considering how strong Real are, how strong still Atleti are, how teams like Villarreal are able to kind of sneak up on them. It's going to be tough to see that potentially happening, or at least that guarantee of Lewandowski winning a trophy every year continuing through. And I think that the fans are kind of felt a little hard done by it, because the team loved him. The team tried to do everything they possibly could to get him to stay. And by that, I mean, they waited until the last possible minute to do so. It was very much me in college with my effort on essays. I did everything I possibly could the night before. Hasan Salihamidzic, also known as Brazzo, the sporting director at Bayern Munich, seemed very intent on getting Erling Haaland and convincing him to stay in the Bundesliga by coming to Bayern Munich. He failed in doing that. And in his failure to do that, not only did he fail to secure the next generation of number 9 striker for Bayern Munich, he also repeatedly, through his actions, spat in the face of the current number 9 striker they had, who was still one of the best players in the world, if not the best striker overall in the world. His failure to truly encapsulate that and secure that, I feel, is more of an issue that Bayern fans should be taking up than Lewandowski actually leaving. Because it would be one thing if Lewandowski told the board, I want to leave, and they said, okay, we have somebody in the pipeline, we're all set. It's another thing to kind of just posture and tell Lewandowski, oh yeah, we don't have a plan beyond you, while also having every rumor leak out of the Sebener Strasse, where Bayern is headquartered, that, oh yeah, we want to go and get Erling Haaland. It was very two-faced, and Bayern kind of ends up with egg on its face, because right now we don't have a very clear number 9 striker. We have a lot of players that can score goals, but nobody who can occupy anything similar to the role that Robert Lewandowski had at the club for the last number of years, almost a decade, yeah, 8 years, I think.
I think you can argue around, not even argue, but if you look around Europe, and you could argue that there are very few actual top level strikers, right? Even, look at the money that Liverpool spent on Darwin Nunez, and to call Darwin Nunez a number 9, and the guy he was quote unquote replacing in Firmino, not really a typical number 9 either. But let's talk numbers about Lewandowski, and then we'll get to what actually he's going to be bringing to Barcelona. So it looks like the salary is going to be around 9 million euros net per season. It was Xavi who first called him way back in February to kind of get this moving. And I said, you explained the Bayern part. Seems like the Barcelona part is just, Xavi's pitch, also what the club obviously economically can provide. Bayern are receiving 45 million euros plus 5 million in add-ons that Lewandowski will most likely hit unless one or two of those are in trophies. And then the Pini Sahavi, which is Lewandowski's agent, and Laporta had a prior relationship, and it seems like that was also important for negotiation. So do you think that Barcelona got a fair price for one of the best goal scorers in the world, even though he had just a year left on that deal? And in truth, though, the honest part of that is that they are getting him for the next 3 years, unlike so many other other transfers where they don't know where the future might hold in a year or two. So the problem would be, though, that unlike some of the transfers, even the free transfers in Christensen and Kessié this season, there is almost no resale value at all to Lewandowski. So all of his price, that 45 million plus 5 million in add-ons and the 9 million net per season, again, that has nothing to do with future earnings from a sale of this player. This is all upfront, going right to him and being put into what he currently provides the club because of his resale value.
Mm-hmm. We can go ahead and talk about resale value. We can go ahead and talk about how, do we think Barcelona paid this certain number and that's a good number? Let me talk about a different number. He's one of the only players in all of Europe to score more than 40 goals, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, but 7 seasons in a row. Lionel Messi cannot say that. Cristiano Ronaldo cannot say that. Robert Lewandowski can. And let's include in that figure that 2 of those were 2 50-goal seasons. One of those also broke a long-standing record held by the late, great Gerd Müller for the most goals ever scored in a Bundesliga season. That is something that Bundesliga fans did not think was possible, especially considering that when you compare it to something like the Premier League, they play about 2 less games per season. So we can talk about resale value and say, Barcelona is not going to be able to sell on Lewandowski. What did you buy then? You bought somebody who scores goals for a team known for scoring goals, who has not always been able to do that these last, I'd say 2 seasons, but especially this last season now that Messi has been plying his trade out in Paris, right? You need somebody to come in and score goals. And that is what Robert Lewandowski does and what Robert Lewandowski does best. I can talk about later how they can best do that, but
which you will, yeah.
There's another thing that I think kind of goes under the radar, in that Lewandowski has mostly been a player that has been on his own up top, and he has dominated that position up top by himself in Bayern's 4-2-3-1 as the one. He's been fantastic at it, right? Now he potentially can be occupying a 1 of 2 striker role with one of his oldest and best teammates in Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang that he spent 4 years at Dortmund with. And that's going to be a very fun dynamic that I think we get to see play out, not only as Bundesliga fans from looking back on the past, but also just as Barcelona fans being able to see the light version of what Bundesliga fans saw with Borussia Dortmund all those years ago.
It's interesting you actually say Aubameyang with Lewandowski, because the expectation, I think, is that Aubameyang is the backup to Lewandowski. We'll have to sit on the bench for him. And it is funny that you also said all those numbers, because these are the ones I have here. I mean, he'll be 34, that being Lewandowski, in a month. But at 33, he scored 50 goals and provided 7 assists in 46 games last year. And when you say fair market price, right? When you talk about strikers, you're immediately just going, how much does a goal cost? And at 45 million euros, looking at his last 8 years track record, you'd believe that Barca are basically paying about €1 million per goal, which, believe it or not, in world football is less than what it's actually a lower number per rate or whatever it is. Because I mean, even think about the Braithwaite deal, right? That was a break, case of Mercy or whatever. They wound up paying, I think, 2.8 million for every goal that Braithwaite scored for the club. So it's not as simple as just 1 million, right? And The other note here is those minutes, right? He would have, that being Lewandowski, he would have been third on Barcelona last year in total minutes at 4,000, only behind Ter Stegen's 4,470 and Busquets' 4,415. So it's not like Lewandowski isn't the only elder statesman, if you will, on Barcelona. So again, Lewandowski did score 50 goals. And as speaking of Aubameyang again, he and Memphis were tied for first for Barcelona with 13. So Barcelona's top scorers, two guys, 13. Lewandowski had 50 last year. So the two-part question there is there any reason at all that Culés could expect any drop-off at least this season? And then part two of that is, how long do you think he'd keep this up? Do you think that he can go until 37, scoring between, we'll say, 42 and 50 goals per season for the next 3 seasons? Because obviously, regardless of how much debt, regardless of anything, if Barcelona is, if the Liga says, hey, we can register him, you're fine, it's really frustrating, everyone's mad at you, but you can register him and everything is good, green light that on the debt stuff, and they do afford Lewandowski and say, hey, we're going to worry about the finances in the future for the next 25 years because of our TV rights, but this is what we're getting now. It seems like Lewandowski might keep up his end of the physical bargain by just being fit for the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm. I think another thing in terms of value for goals, the last time that Robert Lewandowski did not score more goals in a season than games played in a season was 2019, when he scored 40 and 47. Last year, he played in 50 and 46 and he scored 50. His best was when he scored 55 and 47 in the 2019-20 season, right? And in terms of talking about a drop-off, it's possible, but we have to consider, looking back at Robert Lewandowski's statistics, that he's been taking steps up and he's experiencing dropbacks in his first season. So when moving from the second division in Poland to the first division with Lech Poznan, he dropped down 1 goal. He scored 20 and 48 for Poznan when the year before he had scored 21 and 34. Then he took a massive step up to the Bundesliga with Dortmund and he only scored 9 and 43. But that was also at a time where Borussia Dortmund was having a lot of competition with strikers. And then in the 2014-15 season, when he first played for Bayern, he scored 25 and 49, but had 3 more goals in 48 games this year before. What I think this is a difference in, right? The difference between this situation and those situations are, one, it's not necessarily an entirely high jump up, right? We're talking about moving from the second division in an Eastern European league to the top division in an Eastern European league to a top 5 league, right? Now he's going back to a top 5 league, and he is definitely not nearly as young as he was when he moved from Poznan to Dortmund, or even when he moved from Dortmund to Bayern Munich, right? We're talking about somebody who has consistently turned in goals at a very high clip, if not over a goal per game on average, then just around a goal per game on average, or 0.8 goals per game on average for the last number of seasons. And so we're talking about a player that does score a lot. Now, the only question is if Barcelona will be able to provide those number of assists to him. Because if you haven't followed Bayern Munich, I'll basically tell you what the Bayern Munich system has looked like ever since Robert Lewandowski has been around. It's involved a lot of possession. It's involved a lot of possession around the box. And it's mostly been finding ways to draw defenders away from Lewandowski, or so that Lewandowski can find some space so they can hit it out to the wing and send in a cross. And a lot of times it works. A lot of times it doesn't, but a lot of times it works, so much to the point that a majority of his goals have come from headers in the last number of seasons. So the only question that I would have for Barcelona, that's not to say that Lewandowski can't be out on the break. He absolutely can be out on the break. He's quicker than, his FIFA card stats say that he is. He can run. He can outpace defenders if he wants to. But his true bread and butter is off of not necessarily set pieces, but plays set up directly to get the ball up in the air so that he can put it on his head. I don't know if that's necessarily the system that Barcelona has been used to, especially considering that Lionel Messi was not the kind of player to really go out and get a whole bunch of headed goals. But whether or not Xavi is able to adapt his system to his striker is what we're going to have to see if we want to call this a success. And I wouldn't judge whether or not it's a success for at least another couple of seasons, considering the financial dire straits that Barcelona are in. It could very well possibly be that in November, Xavi says, hey, I think we need a certain kind of player to provide this for Lewandowski, and the board may not be able to get that for him until the next season.
Well, I actually would say that I think the board was so hell-bent on renewing Dembele for this very reason. I mean, Dembele has each successive year since he left Dortmund has become, well, he's finally healthy for the first time in 5 years since he ran to Barca, but he's arguably one of the best just pure assist men in world football. I mean, he's dynamic, and he doesn't have to be concerned with it, even with the likes of Memphis. And I mean, Fati was barely on the field last year, but between Aubameyang and Memphis, Dembele also stepped back in that role as a goal scorer at all. So I think with Lewandowski next to him, Dembele will not be looking to shoot in almost any capacity. And it will be all about putting that ball on the head of Lewandowski. And we go back to the Dortmund era again. If you think Aubameyang and Dembele was capable of something, I think I'm excited. I mean, purely from a football side, excited to see what Dembele plus Lewandowski is going to be capable of. I think Rafinha, because he cuts in a bit more from that right wing, wants to get on his left foot, is willing to take long shots. I think the Lewandowski and Rafinha learning curve might be a bit higher. And as far as Ansu Fati goes, if he is healthy and on the field on that left wing, yes, he also cuts in. But the technical skill of Ansu Fati, as far as playing 1-2 passes, as far as creating space himself, I think that partnership is also something that is really exciting. And I don't think there is much to consider there. I think around the edges, of course, I think Lewandowski, Aubameyang, we'll see how that works out. Memphis is probably not long for the club, but I think the strike force is going to work well together. And it also allows those younger midfielders, the Gabis, again, Nico, if he's going to supplant Busquets, not this year at all. Obviously, it'll be Busquets playing 45 games, but if you get some rotation, a young pivot like that, as well as Pedri, those young players are going to just have to focus. I mean, last year we had to see Pedri, he had to score more because Barca just weren't doing it. They had to get more goal scoring for the midfield. And then I think it's going to just take a lot of pressure off everybody rather. So on the point of like styles of play between the two leagues, right? I've never called the Bundesliga a farmers league here because I think the leagues are just radically different. You watch the Bundesliga, there's a bit more space. It's as far as the pace of the game, it's a bit quicker. And I think you and I are both subjected. I mean, you find the Bundesliga and we find the Liga. We're both subjected to the EPL narrative that they A, have the best athletes, and B, the best pace and the best depth everywhere and all that yada yada. But I just think the pace of the game and the space available in the Bundesliga is a bit different than that in the Liga. So quite bluntly, when it comes to Lewandowski, what is Lewandowski going to do in the heat when the other team is sitting in a low block with everybody behind the ball? That's A. And then B, when for the few times that Barcelona don't actually have 60% or 70% of possession in the Liga, what kind of effort is he going to put into the press? And have you seen any decline in his pressing since he turned 30? Because as again, Barca fans will know, as much as Messi and Suarez, it's hard to argue with what they did with putting the ball in the back of the net. Their last 2 or 3 seasons at the club, the pressing was here or there for Messi, and for Suarez, I mean, that's why he was basically forced out, because he just started taking naps on the field whenever Barca didn't have the ball.
Yeah, Lewandowski is perfectly capable of pressing, but this is where the difference in leagues really come in, right? Ever since Jurgen Klopp took over for Borussia Dortmund, everybody in the Bundesliga has been obsessed with gegenpressing, with trying to get possession back. Every single coach that has ever come anywhere close to gegenpressing has always had his links to Jurgen Klopp pop up. Take a look at Thomas Tuchel, for example, right? He was the coach at Mainz, and then he was a coach at Dortmund, right? Those are 2 clubs that Jurgen Klopp was very close with, and he was very close with Tuchel. Even Nagelsmann, in his time, bumped into enough people that were in charge of certain clubs with fantastic pressing.
Right? It was Hoffenheim. It was the assistant coaches at Dortmund and Hoffenheim had also switched at the same time.
Yes, but more importantly, Ralf Rangnick. Ralf Rangnick as the sporting director at RB Leipzig, where Nagelsmann was a coach before Bayern Munich, really helped him to try and put a different style and a different look of press onto his play. And so Lewandowski is capable of pressing. Is that his prime defensive assignment? No. His prime defensive assignment is to be there to be able to receive a quick pass going forward so that he can run into space, get that ball on his foot, maybe take a touch or two, and then put forth a clinical finish. That's the best that he does. But you also have to keep in mind, right? The cast of characters surrounding him at Bayern Munich are A-plus interpreters of space and in terms of pressing. Gnabry is fantastic at pressing. Kimmich, Goretzka, Muller is fantastic at both pressing and interpreting space, right? The back line rotates a bunch, but they're pretty good at knowing where to keep a line and where to keep that defensive line high to keep people pinned back. So he's kind of used to a low block because eventually at the end of the day, that's what's going to happen. Bayern Munich in almost every single game that they play is so dominant in possession in the ways that they want the rest of the game to play that Lewandowski has been pretty used to defenses sitting in a low block. And that's where I think the crossing point needs to be brought up again, because you brought up Dembele, and Dembele is a great crosser, right? There's some great crossers on that team, but almost everybody at Bayern Munich learned to become a great crosser depending on whatever position it was. And what was amazing was that Bayern was so good at maintaining an awareness of where people were rotating and where their space was that you could have anybody on that field move to the wings to cross it into Lewandowski. It wasn't just Coman, it wasn't Gnabry, it wasn't Leroy Sané, it was Muller, it was Kimmich. It was Kimmich back when he was a right back. It's Davies, it's Pavard when he's a right back. It's if they played, it would have been a role given to Nusayr Mazraoui. You would even see David Alaba run down the left wing, even from his left center back position, and be able to send in a cross, right? It was that ability to have so many players that were able to move to the wings and whip in crosses. And that's where I think this might turn out to bite people, because I know that La Liga is a very good counterattacking league, a very fast counterattacking league when it comes to the wings. And I think that might hurt if you try to manipulate that. If Xavi isn't able to drill players well enough to get over to cover positions from where players have the ball so they can move the wings to cross it into Lewandowski, teams are going to find holes on counterattacks very, very quickly. Bayern got very drilled at that, very good at doing that over the years of having Lewandowski be basically their main goal option. And that's something that Barcelona is going to have to learn.
Yeah, that's really interesting you said. I was going to say that Jordi Alba is an elite crosser, as is Dembele, but the drop off after that, you're right, is considerably notable. We still have to see what Rafinha is going to do. And I haven't seen much crossing from Ansu because he's usually receiving. When it comes to Pedri and Gabi, I mean, they're really looking to play through balls, and their crosses are more in the half space into the other half space as they are from out wide. And then, there are huge questions about Serginho Dest on the right wing at the right back spot. And even if Azpilicueta were derived from Chelsea, he's not an elite crosser by any means at all. And
not at all.
Now you're talking Sergio Roberto. So again, while Alba is that elite crosser, and you have again an elite crosser on the right side in Dembele, there is going to be space in behind Jordi Alba. And as you mentioned too, that against that counterattack, I mean, we could have a different conversation if Jules Koundé arrives to Barcelona next week, but even he is not going to be some kind of savior on the defensive side of the ball. I think he's just going to help Barcelona continue to raise the stakes of having more pressure. They're just going to become more elite when it comes to getting forward from the back all the way up through. And so to deal with Barcelona still having a questionable defense, for which I have to admit Bayern does not. There's solidity there, and to the point where they could move Kimmich from right back to midfield because you had the resources to do that. So, all right, one or two more quick things about Lewandowski here. Even though Kool-Aid's, I mean, he's been around for more than a decade. We've been seeing him for anyone who's watched the Bundesliga, or if you tune into Champions League, or if you tune into the World Cup and watch any games with Poland, or he basically carries that team on his back. He, by the way, is the first Polish player in Barcelona history as well, to throw that in there. But so arguably his best generational skill is putting the ball in the back of the net, which is a pretty good skill. It means you have a long, fruitful career. But what other skill will surprise Kool-Aid's in a good way? And then the inverse of that, what about Lewandowski's game do you think Kool-Aid's are going to expect is going to be exactly what they want and not necessarily what they want?
I mean, For somebody that's a goal scoring machine, I hate to say that he's one dimensional, because there are multiple different ways that he scores goals, right? He can score goals from the set pieces pretty close to the box. He's a pretty good poacher. He is got great reaction. So if like a header doesn't go his way and the ball is anywhere near his feet, he'll make that effort to go and get it. It's hard to point out any. I know this is going to sound biased, but it's hard for me to point out anything negative about him, because
He's the best FIFA player for the last like 3 years, of course. Like he would have won the Ballon d'Or in 2020.
He should have won the Ballon d'Or in 2020, and he should have won the Ballon d'Or in 2021. If we're being completely honest,
I'll give you 2020.
Right. I know that we'll have a debate on 2021.
Yeah, but I'll give you 2020, certainly. Yeah.
But here's really why I come down to that, right? Because he's not the most dynamic defender, right? But he doesn't have to be. He never has had to be before. So his only job has been to score goals. And for the last 2-3 seasons, nobody in Europe has done it better than him. So I think it's kind of hard to point out something that Barcelona fans would necessarily be disappointed in his game, because he is an exceptionally hard worker, and he works very hard to do what he does, and he's the best in the world at it.
Well, will he be willing, let's say even off the field, will he be willing to, not to say take a sub role, because obviously he's going to be the every game starter, but if Xavi wants to rotate, to give minutes to Aubameyang to keep him happy, to occasionally put Ansu Fati in the middle to preserve his health. And yes, it does break my heart that Xavi has to prioritize the needs of a 19-year-old and not the 34-year-old, but that's again Ansu's injury history. But I mean, is there a scenario, I guess that would be the bad way, right? The bad skill that he's not willing to play kumbaya in that Barca locker room?
The thing is, I don't know, because Bayern Munich hasn't really had a striker to challenge him, right? The last time it was Mario Mandzukic, and he left pretty quickly after Lewandowski came in. So there really hasn't been a player to really challenge him. Even when he was at Dortmund, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang wasn't necessarily challenging him out front. They were using Aubameyang in a myriad of roles, including out on the wing, to supply Lewandowski. So if Xavi wants to actively, for a number of games, bench Lewandowski, I don't honestly know what that's going to be like, because for every year that he's been in a Bayern uniform, and for at least half of the 4 years that he was in a Borussia Dortmund uniform, he has been the guy. He has been the main starting striker, and barring injury or suspension, he has almost always been that guy up there. So I honestly don't know what his reaction would be if he was told that he was starting the game on the bench.